Hello, fellow Kantians.
Donald Trump is a Kantian. He's a German idealist.
My name is Ian, and I'm here today to tier rank the German idealists and complete the system.
Kant, he could not complete the system of German idealism. Trump is going to complete the system. He's going to derive the complete system.
All trolling aside, I love German idealism, and today we're not just going to be tier ranking these philosophers, but I'm going to be giving you guys a couple introductory texts to German idealism and giving you guys my preferred reading order for each of these philosophers. So for everyone out there who is new to German idealism, I really want to recommend two texts because I got inspired to make this video because I just read The 25 Years of Philosophy, a Systematic Reconstruction by Eckhart Forster. And this was a really good book because it's very recent. I think it came out like a year or two ago. And Forster plays with the idea that it has been said before that with Kant, Hegel, Schelling, and their whole group, that was the completion of philosophy. Everything after that wasn't philosophy. And just because there were so many heavyweights at that time in German idealism and philosophy. And I really enjoy that one. But I feel like the best one, if you really want to hit the best of both worlds with an academic, and the 25 Years of Philosophy is a little bit easier, but the other one is German Philosophy, 1760 through 1860, The Legacy of Idealism by Terry Pinkert. And Pinkert is really one of the authorities on German idealism, especially Hegel. I mean, he's written about Kant. There's a great interview out there that I just watched. I mean, literally as I was about to make this video last night, I got sucked into this other video where Terry Pinkert talks about how to read Hegel with Slavoj Žižek on a channel called Subulation. It seems like a socialist type of channel, socialist academic type of channel. But go check out that interview. Him and Terry Pinker basically talk about how to read Hegel and approaches to reading Hegel. So if you're real, and I'll be going over some of that today, but those are my two recommendations for getting started with German idealism. So let's get on to ranking our first German idealist of the day, Friedrich Hölderlin. And have you read Schelling before?
Consciousness. Are you familiar with the philosopher Friedrich Schelling? Have you read the critical historical introduction to the philosophy of mythology?
All right, so we got my boy Schelling right here, and I'm going to have to give Schelling an A. And Schelling is very unexplored in terms of a lot of these thinkers, and it took me a while to really dive into Schelling, and I had to do it through a lot of weird ways. And what actually got me interested in the topic is I was looking, I had taken, I think, 2 Kant classes and had read Hegel and philosophy classes. And I knew about Schelling though. So I started looking up for some secondary sources on Schelling, and I basically came up with nothing. Slavoj Žižek has a very good book out there called The Invisible Remainder that is loosely based on Schelling, but it ties in it ties Schelling in with media, and it's really good, but it's not maybe like a beginner text or a text that really reveals too much. It's just a fun text. I would recommend that one, The Invisible Remainder by Slavoj Žižek. But then as I was on Amazon searching, this book came up, and it was called, I think it was just called Schelling by Michael Tessarion. And I was like, where did I hear that name before? And I realized when I was 13 and on the internet, I watched these videos about ancient societies and all this weird conspiracy stuff. And lo and behold, this Michael Tessarion guy, however long later, 15, I don't know when I first came across this book again, is just as crazy, but is a fan of German idealism, lo and behold. So I got the book and I read it, and this book, Schelling by Michael Tessarion, actually was surprisingly good, and I'm not here to endorse any of his other ideas or thoughts because I don't know that much about them, and from what I have seen, they're pretty far out there, which is fine, but I can attest to the content in this book, Schelling. And reading that text helped get me ready for the first text I recommend other than these introductory ones, which is The System of Transcendental Idealism along with its introduction and its supplement, The Ideas of a Philosophy of Nature. And this book is really good. And one of the unique things about this book, and we're going to be talking about a bunch in a second, but it's actually the first use of a systematic dialect, the famous Hegelian dialect or dialects in general. But that Marx and others took up. It's actually the first use in a real philosophy book of the dialect. And I that's a huge deal. But Schelling had a very unique twist to his idea of God. And he's this. So if we look at the line of German idealism, we should take this back. It kind of starts gaining ground with Heraclitus, and then it moves down to Spinoza. And Spinoza, had this idea of a more multifaceted God, maybe a God of many consciousnesses, or maybe like Schelling said, that God had a unconscious. And obviously, Schelling didn't know what the unconscious was in terms of the psychoanalytical definition. But Schelling and other German idealists actually did, at some level, help evolve the idea of the unconscious, or really discover it, because we attributed it to Freud. But Henry Ellenberger, in his book, The Discovery of the Unconscious, The History and Evolution of Dynamic Psychiatry, it's a great book. Everyone needs to go read it. It's Jordan Peterson started recommending it, so I got a copy before he blew up, so for like $2, but now some of the copies are going for $50 plus. But it is an there are obviously online versions. And Schelling's natural philosophy really was a big stepping stone for the unconscious because, quote, the starting point of Schelling's philosophy was the contention that nature and spirit both sprang from the absolute and constituted an unbreakable unity. Quote from Schelling, nature is visible spirit, spirit is visible nature. Spirit is invisible nature, sorry. And when you dive a little bit deeper into Schelling, Schelling believed that God's unconscious was nature, and God became cognizant of itself through observing nature. There's many expansions on that, and I know I'm like maybe botching it a little bit because I'm trying to reduce it down to a sentence, but Schelling, when you start reading his work, is an absolute phenom and needs to be read more. And let's talk about Schelling's roommate, the poet who's really considered a romantic, but if we look, it's like, okay, they were roommates alive at the same time and the same age, Hölderlin. And Hölderlin was a poet, and we are going to read one of his poems now. Bread and Wine, Part 7. Oh friend, we arrived too late. The divine energies are still alive, but isolated above us in the archetypal world. They keep going there, and apparently don't bother if humans live or not. That is a heavenly mercy. Sometimes a human's clay is not strong enough to take the water. Human beings can carry the divine only sometimes. What is living now? Night dreams of them, but craziness helps. So does sleep. Grief and night toughens us, until people capable of sacrifice once more rock an iron cradle, desire people, as the ancients, strong enough for water. In thunderstorms it will arrive. I have the feeling often, meanwhile, is better to sleep, since the guest comes seldom. We waste our life waiting, and I haven't the faintest idea how to act or talk. In the lean years, who needs pots? But poets, as you say, are like the holy disciple of the wild one, who used to stroll over the fields through the whole divine night. Hölderlin's got some fire for being an 18th century writer and early 19th century writer. And once again, I know he's not considered a German idealist, but he was instrumental in some of the thought. He was one of the artistic backbones to the movement because, a good philosophical movement has the big nerd like Kant, has maybe the weird out there guy like Schelling, the artist like Hölderlin, and then just the golden boy Hegel. That's how you know you have a very dynamic and great movement. So because of that, I am going to give Hölderlin a B. Next on our list, we have the man himself, Hegel, the boogeyman of Western philosophy, has caused so many problems, inspired Marx and other people, which is great. I mean, thought has to continue moving forward. That doesn't make, that doesn't mean it has to be enacted in political ways like how it did. But Hegel is really awesome and really hard to read. I took a class on Hegel, and by the end, I knew some things, but not enough. And I had to go back to secondary sources to get back to some primary sources so that I could start to understand Hegel more. So there's two introductory books secondary sources that I would recommend to get into Hegel. The first is very short, and it's just Hegel, a very short introduction by Pete Singer. You get the basis of his ideas. It's written very well, and it's just a good starting point. It will take you like an hour and a half to read. I remember reading it. It was super easy. Next is actually a book that was published this year, and that is by Slavoj Žižek again, and it's just reading Hegel. And this one's a little bit more complicated, just a little bit more, because Žižek just wants to talk, bring in some rants, but this one's also a very good introductory text that any of you guys can read. But we are not done with the secondary sources yet, and you can start here. So I would recommend starting here if you have some backing in philosophy, but maybe you don't want Hegel, you don't want to want to hop straight into Hegel. I really recommend starting here, and that is Hegel's Philosophical Development by Kroner. And this is what really opened my mind. And I go back to this text sometimes, especially when I was reading Hegel's primary sources. I would go back to this, and I took so many notes in this book so that when I was being confronted with some of the ideas and vocabulary in Hegel, I could follow it a little bit easier. Because if you're self-studying and you don't have a teacher or a professor or someone to ask questions to, you need all the help you can get, especially with harder thinkers like Hegel. And now this may be a very unpopular opinion, but I think that you should read the boogeyman of so many philosophy students and thinkers out there who tried to read this, The Phenomenology of Spirit. And it is a hard text, but you have on your side YouTube. There are free online university courses, YouTube read-alongs that can help you understand this text. There's actually secondary sources that also help you follow the phenomenology of spirit. And that's what I did. And once again, it will help you through. I don't know. I'm not a mad genius. I'm not that kid. I'm not that guy, that philosophy bro that can just read something and I get it and I know and I can debate it. I need to take things slower a little bit, and I can retain a lot, but if I want to really know and remember it, having a secondary source for a harder text can really help me. I mean, that's what I remember reading Being in Time and like kind of getting it. Like I got it, I knew the main ideas, but then a new translation came out a couple years ago, let's say 5 or 6 years ago, and that translation came out with a guide, and the easier translation plus a guide that was longer than the actual book, like really explained everything. And now I feel like I can remember a lot of the principles and ideas of Being in Time, which actually was influenced very much by the German Idealists and Schelling. Schelling was actually one of Heidegger's favorites. So in my opinion, that's where you need to start. So we are going to give Mr. Hegel an S, just because of his influence. If you look at what phenomenology and like what everyone did with phenomenology, like Ponty, Deleuze, obviously Heidegger, Husserl, and everyone that they've influenced, that is a huge group of people. And unfortunately, even though like people like my boy my boy Schelling, maybe did a little bit better in terms of what I like to read about, his impact and where he really stands in the philosophical canon isn't strong, and that has to be taken into account because Hegel's ideas have been implemented everywhere, and Schelling's ideas have just been kind of worked into weird pagan groups or like pagan neo-spiritual philosophy. So that's why I feel like Hegel is superior. Next, we have the other boogeyman of a lot of people in philosophy classes, and that is Immanuel Kant. And man, Kant, we got a lot to say about Kant, but I'm going to give Kant, I guess we'll just throw him up at the start. I'm going to give Kant an A. I can't believe I'm saying this right now. I have come to enjoy Kant. Like I said, I took those 2 classes with this Kantian. He was a really weird dude my professor at my university. He's like really he was working in the philosophy professor aesthetic and living out in the middle of the desert. But a lot of things are missing. Like, okay, you're going to be the philosophy king and be a deep reader and live out in nature and try to go off grid. But you're also going to be a Catholic and not really care about spending time in nature or like anything about like spiritual ecology or any of that, and like trying to connect deeper. I'm just kind of like, all right, that's a very interesting lifestyle choice and aesthetic. If you have unlimited options to pick, I'm going to be the Kantian desert master who's a Christian who acts like he likes nature, but you guys know. I mean, academics have problems. I have problems too, but I try not to bring my aesthetics into every aspect of my life. And if I did, I hope that I would be critiqued. So with Kant, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you guys, I really don't feel like you need to start with secondary sources with Kant. You actually can. Terry Pinkard, who we just talked about, who had that video with Zizek and wrote the great introductory text to German Idealism. He has a great book on Kant, but I honestly feel like you can read The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. And for the people that want a secondary source, I guess I should say this. There's one by someone named Geyer, and he gives a great introduction. I read that one when I was in one of these Kant classes because I was just like drowning underwater. I was like, I wasn't really studying. My head wasn't in it for that first class, so like I needed help fast. So I read that book, and that one was really good. So it's by a guy named Guy, Guyer. But I feel like anyone, if you're just reading Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, and that's usually like if you take like an ethics class in school, in a philosophy course at university, usually you'll read like Utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill, the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, and the Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals by Kant. That's usually the reading list, maybe, and 1 or 2 other things. And then my other recommendation, which is actually probably a little bit easier, is Prologamna. Dude, I'm messing it up. That's what this channel is, everybody. I just mess up names, mess up titles of books to any future metaphysics. And this book, I say, is the easiest in Kant's collection. Really helps you dive into his idea on metaphysics and really starts getting you ready for the critiques. And honestly, you can read the critiques in any order that you want. And once again, with all of these things, not maybe the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, but you can for all these things with Kant. There are a ton of books that can help you, but just free online courses with professors, and that you can just follow them through. And I really think like you can get, like, I learned more from those online classes than the Kantian professor expert at my university, because I had the time and the space and didn't have the pressure to write essays. So that's how I would explore Kant. Start with the easy stuff and ramp up. That's with everything in philosophy. If you, even at the start of philosophy, go read A History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell or A Story of Philosophy by Will Durant. That's my recommendation. Pick one you like, maybe read a little bit of the Greeks, and then you just start picking your way through. Next, we have Fichte, and honestly, he's really hard to read. Like, he's so hard to read, I had to get a friend. I had to recruit one of my friends to read him with me. I don't know if anyone of my philosophy friends out, maybe you're that friend, has that friend out there, and they're like, really smart, and like sometimes I need to recruit people to read something with me to explain things, especially if there's no secondary or online sources to help. And so I would recommend, though, after reading some Fichte, the System of Ethics. It's not that hard, and if you follow it, it's like his work is very unique because it's like very fragmented and it follows like a system. You have to follow the system from A to Z, and sometimes I forget to even make my bed for like a day or two. So like following a German idealist system from A to Z and in a translated version from probably the most disregarded German idealists can be a little bit rough. So I'm going to give Fichte, if I'm saying that right, someone's got to get a C, and so he's going to get the C here. And last we have Jacob Boehme, if I'm saying that correctly again. And he was the king. I mean, he was the predecessor of all these guys, and he was an alchemist. He was kind of a weirdo. He had a very eccentric and eclectic mind and lifestyle. And because of that, because we're about to conclude this video, we are going to give him a B. If you guys want to see me rank modernist poets, go click on this video right here, subscribe, and I will see you guys later. Peace.